Curated by the people, for the people. CIUT 89.5 FM is the sound of your city.
Student and listener-supported community radio. CIUT 89.5 FM, celebrating 35 years as the sound of your city.
What you just heard was a Estonian punk rock song written in 1989. It was during the Gorbachev liberations. That song was about how things can, suddenly go backwards with a change in leadership, and suddenly people are being sent to Siberia once again.
Very interesting. You forgot to introduce our show.
Oh, yeah.
We are listening to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. Here we have
Alex Troxel.
And I'm Seth Martosh. And Alex, you're very knowledgeable about our country of the day. Today we're visiting Estonia.
I just couldn't help myself to get into the music. It had energized me to start. And, I'll be honest, I'll come clean here. I'm not actually an Estonian scholar or anything like that. But where I got that information was from one of our interviewees this week,
right.
Professor Kasekamp, who is a Estonian historian, I suppose.
Right.
And we're going to hear from him later today.
Yes. For those of you who may be new to the show, Tracks from Abroad is a student-run radio show here at the University of Toronto where we interview students from different countries, talk a little bit about their culture, about music and food, whatever really they want to talk about. And like we mentioned today, we're going to Estonia, and we talked to a father-daughter duo. First up, we have a student at the university, Kaisa, who is Professor Kasekamp's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting to speak with both of them and hear their different perspectives on their country and learn a bit about Estonian culture.
Yeah, especially because Professor Kasekamp was actually born here.
Right.
But his daughter was born in Estonia, Kaisa, when they moved there.
Yeah.
We learned a lot of interesting things. It didn't make the cut, unfortunately, but I was very excited to learn about how the Estonian government is all their government forms and their government services are completely digitized.
Yeah.
So tax returns, all you have to do is it's pre-filled out. You just go to the website, you confirm that.
Would be nice.
That would be so nice.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting stuff that unfortunately didn't make the cut, but we do have a lot of interesting chat with you today, and we're going to start it by throwing it to our interview with Kaisa.
I'm from Estonia, and I'm also actually half Finnish, so my mom is Finnish and my dad is Estonian, and I grew up in Estonia in this place called Viimsi, which is about 30 minutes from Tallinn, which is the capital. and I went to school there until grade 7, and I moved to Toronto and went to grade 9 here. So I skipped a grade just because the Estonian system, the ages are different. So here, I went to high school in Toronto, and now I'm a U of T. I'm a third year now. I'm studying ethics, society, and law, and I'm minoring in environmental ethics and actually Finnish studies, which is really fun, although it's a really small program. So I get to practice Finnish language a bit.
That's cool. And when we talked to your dad, he was explaining how Estonia has a very cutting-edge digital world. All the government websites are all very efficiently put together. Would you have been learning that technical aspect that early on in your education, or is that something that comes later in high school?
I remember in like 4th, 5th grade, maybe even 3rd, we had computer classes. So we did like some like rudimentary computer, not like actually coding or anything, but it was more like we had to know how to put websites in, know some like basic softwares and things. And I remember everyone kind of hating it. It was one of those things that I realized only later on why we had computer lessons in classes and why it was important. But it was like good. I mean, every school usually has desktops available. So you have classes. It's like a basic, I don't know, it's like English class.
I think that's still more effective than our computer lab here, which my experience was a lot of kids playing Minecraft and not a lot of...
We had one called, it was like Tux Paint or something like that.
We also did Tux Paint,
with the little
actually.
penguin?
We did.
Yeah, so we would go to computer class and just pretend to do our work, but everybody's in the back just like drawing and like stamping stuff.
But we actually had like practices, like we had tasks on Tux Paint. Like we had to do that. And we got marks on what we created sometimes.
Wow.
In general, I think that it's modeled around some like maybe US or something else. Like I don't think it's like the things that we did were always original. There were definitely some like American softwares and things that we learned.
So could you remind us about why you ended up coming to Canada?
Yes, so my father is a professor here at University of Toronto, and he's the chair of Estonian studies. So we moved here because he had got the job opportunity, and because also my grandparents moved here during World War II and have lived here for over 60 years probably. And so we came here. They're getting pretty old, so also to take care of them and to be closer to them. And it just seemed like a good opportunity.
And what's it like having your dad at the university?
It's kind of funny. I've had friends who would take his classes, and it's always really funny because they're always like, he gives like paper tests and all these things, and we hated it so hard. And I'm just there like, you know, when I'm at home, I did the test and I tried it, and I actually didn't seem that hard. But in general, I think it's just fun. We don't actually talk about his work as much as home, just because I think it's like a bit more confidential, and he doesn't want me to like get too much of an into the university life. But in general, it's fun. Sometimes I get free coffee in his office, and that's my biggest success story.
What about just having someone who's very knowledgeable about Estonian history? Has that sort of shaped your perception of Estonia and your identity?
A bit more. There's definitely like things I think when I'm older that I've realized and we talk about more. When I was younger, it was more so when we would travel, we would go to like every single church and we had to read every plaque and kind of learn about the different countries and stuff like that. And I think that he was very adamant on us actually going to all the historic spots and kind of museums and things like that. And in that way, but when it comes to Estonian history, I remember at least in school, I got such a bad taste in my mouth for it because it's like medieval, like, you know, you learn about knights and all these things that I didn't care about when I was so young. So I think like after that, I didn't really consider it as much. But now when we moved here, there's a big Estonian community in Toronto. So getting involved in different, like they have lectures, they have like archives, they have Estonian Music Week, which is the small music festival that happens almost every year around May in Toronto. So through things like that, I've learned more. And then through that, maybe I talk to my father about certain things and then he enlightens more about them. And then I kind of learn more about Estonian history that I actually will remember, because I'm pretty sure that there have been many times where he tells me things and I've just completely been doing something else. So I have to confess to that. But recently, yes, he has in a way awakened my interest in Estonian history, and I think it's also through U of T and learning about different things and the current like Russian-Ukrainian war and in general, like I feel like it's just something that has really kind of reawakened in me.
So you mentioned the Estonian Music Week. Is there a song that you could play for us that we might hear at Estonian Music Week?
Sure. There's this band called Puulup, and they have a song called Marta Fana, kind of experimental folky band.
Cool.
They do music that's almost like avant-garde, if you folky but weird. It's like one of those, like, it's not typical Estonian music, but it's definitely like kind of trying to be that.
That's cool. Well, we'll have a listen, and we'll be right back with Kaisa on Tracks from Abroad.
Welcome back to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. Today we're here talking with Kaisa from Estonia. Kaisa, I wanted to ask you a little bit about something also that your dad had brought up when we spoke with him, about the festival Laulupidu. If you could tell us a little bit more about it, and if you've had your own experiences there, if you could share that as well.
Sure. I mean, it's a big song festival. It's almost like the Olympics of Estonia. It has happened since, 18 1869, and it's almost like a big protest. It started off as that, and now it happens every, I think, 4 years or so, and I've attended. I have never sang there because it's really hard to actually sing, although there's maybe 100,000 people singing on the stage. It's a really competitive choir process to get there. So every school usually has choirs, and I was in a school choir, but we didn't qualify. We were bad singers apparently. We didn't. It's you need to memorize all these songs, and you need to kind of be really good at it. And then you get to go, and then you practice, and it's this whole big process. So I only remember actually going and attending. But it's a really powerful experience to be there and witness so many thousands of people singing in unison or at the same time. And the amount of precision and planning and everything that goes into it, it's truly impressive. I don't think that there's anything like it. It's a lot of songs get repeated because the audience goes encore. Yeah. And it's just, the audience itself is also basically half of Estonia attends, either as a singer audience or anything. So... And it's televised. This summer, actually, I think there was some kind of youth song festival going on, and I was watching it on my laptop. So it is something that is very personal to a lot of Estonians. It is something that every person knows about and either attends. There's a lot of choirs here from Toronto that actually attend because it's easier to get there, because if you are an international Estonian choir, the process of getting there is not as tedious. You don't need to be that good.
Right.
You can go, you're an honorary, a little choir. So I'm trying to maybe join a choir here, and then I get to actually go and sing on the stage, and that would be really neat. But yes.
You said it's a personal thing for a lot of Estonians. Could you say a bit more about what that is?
It's very nationalistic for sure. It's mostly because of the history, because it started as the singing revolution, and it's the thing that kind of got Estonia its independence in a way. So it's one of those personal things where a lot of people are reminded of their history, things that in everyday life you might forget. When you go there, you're in unison with so many thousands of people. They all share the same heritage, same nationality usually. Of course, there's many people who come to observe the festival. When I've been there, I see a lot of people crying, feeling really prideful to be Estonian. It feels like Independence Day, but it's just, I think for smaller countries, it just means so much more. Just to know that they were able to kind of create this atmosphere in this country, and there's something to be very proud of, and to be proud of being Estonian. Then you're also kind of connected to the elements of care for your country and care for other people. So you're I almost feel less selfish and more community-minded.
And do you think that's something that's translated into the younger generations who weren't around for the singing revolution?
For sure. I think that's the main contact they have with history, and that's the biggest contact they have. Just going there to sing, and you're singing these songs that were sung during the first festivals where independence was gained. Learning those songs too. Some of them might have maybe phrases of Estonia is the country of whatever fatherland, something like that, or some of them might have prettier messages that are we're flying towards the beehive or something like that. There's a lot of symbolic imagery in them. They're not necessarily about war, or they're not about violence usually. They have way more poetic, beautiful messaging, in my opinion.
Are you nervous at all in the future that message might not be translated as much to the younger generation and kind of losing that integral part of Estonian history?
Not really. When I see the youth today still participating in choirs, I see even my friends who don't seem the very nationalistic, or in any way they're kind of maybe not as connected to Estonian heritage. I see them still going to choir practice, and I see them still valuing that as something almost sacred. It's almost like a little spiritual. A lot of Estonians are not religious. It's one of the least religious countries in the world, and I feel that sense of community that, for example, church would give you is kind of created there.
So most of the songs even aren't very religiously oriented. It's more about Estonia.
Yeah, and some of them are about nature, or they're very diverse in that way, I think.
Tell us a little bit about the nature and the natural beauty of Estonia. What can you say to that?
Well, Estonia is really flat. And it's really small. However, one of my favorite things in Estonia, because there's no mountains really, there's maybe a hill. It's like only a few hundred meters. But one of the prettiest things is the marshlands and the bogs. There's a lot of beautiful bogs that people can actually visit and hike on. There's like little trails that are created on the bog, but it's one of those places where a lot of people go swimming. A lot of people will wake up at like 5 a.m. and see the like mist or fog that's created, and it's one of the most beautiful things. It feels like a really sacred ground, and they're like 8,000 years old, these bogs, and that's one of the pastimes that we used to do with our family, like go on a little day trip hiking in the bog. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things in the summers or winters. Even you can go there in the winter too, and it's beautiful, that I look forward to.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the difference between the mindset that an Estonian person has to the environment versus somebody that you might find in Canada?
I guess like it depends on who you are in Canada, right? Because it's usually you talk about the Western mindset that is really anthropocentric. I mean, human-centric, like we are the ones who are kind of able to manipulate the ground, manipulate everything around us, kind of do whatever, destruct or like it's domination, basically. I think a lot of Estonians, at least the ones who value nature higher, usually see it more as a harmony and more as a part of everyday life. They don't see it as like, I need to like go somewhere far away to like be in nature. They see it as a part of their everyday surroundings, and they feel like they're always a part of it, more so. At least I think a lot of people who I talk to, my friends, would resonate with that. And in general, I feel like a lot more like refuge is taken also in nature. Like it's usually like people go on walks in forests almost daily, because there's just so much forest around, and things just take place in more naturalistic grounds, I guess. I mean, sauna culture is really big in Estonia, as it is in Finland, and I think sauna also is something that usually is by a lake, by a sea, or somewhere in the forest, and that connects people even more so with the environment, because you're cleaning yourself, but then you also maybe hop in a lake or go in the snow or something like that. But that's a very common experience for all Estonians, so I feel like in that way they also connect more with wherever they are.
Well, on that note, is there another song that you could recommend for us that we can play?
So this is a famous Estonian folk song that is really close to like a lullaby, and I just really like this rendition of it. And it's very peaceful, and it talks about youth, and the title means When I Was Still Young.
All right, well, thank you for the recommendation. We're going to have a listen to Kui mina alles noor veel olin by Ret. And you're listening to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM.
Hello and welcome back to Tracks from Abroad. Today we're talking with Kaisa about Estonia. And Kaisa, I wanted to ask you about your studies in ethics, society, and law. What led you to study that?
I was in a high school in Toronto that had this laws program. It's like law in action within schools. And I remember doing that, and I kind of felt that it was really interesting. Just learning about the Canadian Charter, learning about Indigenous rights and law in Canada, learning about that in general. And I guess I just kind of continued with that because I didn't really know what else to do. And since my dad is a historian, I, for some reason, did not even consider learning history, just as a retaliation maybe in one way or another. But yeah, it is just, I guess, ethics is something that I like. And then just the law aspect, I guess, was something that I kind of knew.
Is there a specific issue that sort of excites you, gets you passionate, or is it just the general experience of studying law?
I guess it's the general experience of studying. I really like to learn about different things and kind of have a really diverse perspective on the world. I just really like learning about different worldviews and different kinds of experiences that people have, especially I think for a lot of people coming from different places and feeling like the feeling diasporic. I guess it's just one of those where you kind of want to know about other people's experiences and so on, just because you feel like yours is unique in one way or another.
Do you have any friends back in Estonia that are studying the same kind of things as you and have a much different approach or perspective on these types of issues as well?
I don't actually have that many people who study what I'm studying. I have a lot of friends who study psychology or acting or something like that. But I think they're all really interested about what I'm studying here because, at least in high school, they don't learn as much about American history. They don't really learn about all the social issues and problems that we discuss here. It's like the education is not maybe as global. It's kind of Europe-centered in a way, or more like even Estonia-centered sometimes. So when I tell them about Indigenous issues here, they wouldn't have known anything about it. Or even like I know that a lot of my friends never even learned about the slave trade, Atlantic slave trade or things like that. So there's some gaps that maybe in their education system they don't learn, and there's some gaps here that we don't learn about their education, like not their education system, but about that hemisphere region, which all is logical why that doesn't happen. There's so many things to learn about. So I think it's more so that I always have a really interesting discussion with them for them to learn more about the things that are going on here and kind of putting things into perspective for them and understanding how like maybe how things happen in North America and how what the US is doing and what the kind of social unrest around here is more so.
What would you say those topics are that you think Canadians and students studying in Canada get the impression are global and universal problems that you don't think are actually that universal?
I think a lot of students here don't really understand the kind of maybe post-Soviet, like how a lot of people might see Russia as a bigger threat, the government of Russia as a bigger threat than it is. I think it's more so just a different kind of people tend to really villainize the U.S. in a lot of things and blame every single world problem on the U.S. when a lot of that also would go to Russia from the Eastern European perspective or post-Soviet perspective. And people don't really maybe fully understand why like smaller countries like Estonia like need NATO to survive or need to be in the European Union to survive, and what that history is and how sovereign countries kind of deserve to be sovereign and so on. So I think there's just some things that maybe have come up with the recent Russia-Ukraine war that when I'm in school here, I sometimes feel like students don't fully understand or study. And I mean, I'm very biased. I am Estonian. But in that way, kind of is a bit maybe unfortunate just to kind of lack that fully, in my opinion, global understanding of history and colonization.
Interesting. Do you think you could recommend us one more song?
Yeah, I can recommend you my favorite kind of jazz groovy song from the Estonian Soviet Republic. So this is an Estonian song that's called Alone But Free by CIUT. And it's just this really groovy, it's in this album Funk Disco Jazz from Soviet Estonia. And I think it's a good continuation of this conversation.
Well, we're going to take a listen to Yksi Quid Vabana, and we'll be right back on Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM.
Hello and welcome back to Tracks from Abroad. Earlier in today's episode, we were speaking with Kaisa, so thanks again for speaking with us. And we've got a packed show today, so I think we're just going to go straight into the next interview. Could you tell us a bit about that, Seth?
Yeah, we now talk to, as we mentioned before, Kaisa's dad, Professor Andres Kasekamp, who, if you want to know a little bit more about him, actually has a Wikipedia page.
Excellent.
With some of his published books and journals on his studies. And we're going to speak to him and learn a little bit more about Estonia.
Start by telling us a little bit about your origin.
Well, actually, I'm Estonian Canadian. I was born in Toronto, and actually I went to U of T as a student. But then after my postgraduate work in the UK, then in the 90s I went to Estonia. Estonia had become independent when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And since I'd studied Estonian history and was interested in Estonian politics, I went there and I became a professor in Estonia. And I came back to Toronto only 5 years ago because Toronto has the only chair of Estonian studies in North America. And that's because the community here, the Estonian Canadian community, is the largest one in North America, and they endowed this chair back in the 1980s. And the previous professor who held the chair retired, went back to Estonia, and then it was kind of an offer I couldn't refuse to come back, even though I was very happy in Estonia.
Mm-hmm. So was that community, the large Estonian community here, something that got you interested in Estonian history, or was it some other influence?
Well, to be frank, it was the sort of fate of this nation during the Second World War, including the fact that the Soviets arrested and deported and killed my grandparents, which was a similar story for many Canadian Estonians who became then refugees at the end of the Second World War. And that's like most of the community has all come after the Second World War because of that. But very few of my contemporaries were interested in history. They all came to U of T and studied engineering or wanted to become dentists or lawyers or whatever else. But I was the odd one who had an interest in history. And because there was this chair of Estonian studies, which was set up when I was still a student here, then I had that opportunity to be involved in Estonian affairs academically.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what you study? Is there something specific, a specific part of Estonian history?
Well, the chair of Estonian studies has to cover everything, right? And
yeah.
Anyone who's interested about anything to do with Estonia, I'm the go-to guy.
Okay.
Right? So, but specifically, my own dissertation was on fascism in Estonia between the two world wars. But I've also written sort of a general history of the three Baltic states. Estonia is usually too small to be discussed alone, and there's no chair of Latvian or Lithuanian studies, so I cover all three. In the history department, I teach the course on modern Baltic history, for instance. But I'm also at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, where I teach some more contemporary issues related to fascism, which is the populist radical right at present. Mm-hmm. So talking about, for instance, the other week, a guy called Geert Wilders, the Freedom Party in the Netherlands, won the elections there, and that sort of made big headlines about the rise of the far right in Europe and what that will mean for European integration going forward. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of other thing I teach. And this semester I've been teaching in the history department sort of general sort of modern European history.
Right. Have you seen a rise in these, right-wing parties and, political ideals in the world over the last little while?
Well, I've been studying this for a few decades already,
Mm-hmm.
so I've seen these waves, and there are always headlines about the rise of the far right or the radical right or the populist right, whatever you want to call them. And it's completely dependent on the context of the countries, right? So there's ups and downs. But at the moment it seems to be on the rise again. But say take South America. You had the president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, who was following in Trump's footsteps, but he was voted out. He's left office. But now you have the new guy in Argentina, who seems to also be a right-wing populist, although of a kind of a different style. So it's really dependent on the context. But what is perhaps new is we used to regard these far-right movements as being something kind of just like a protest, sort of a flash in the pan that sort of they have a sudden rise and then they disappear after a while. But now they're becoming sort of very much rooted in political systems all over the place. And they're also kind of learning best practices from others, similar movements. And there's lots of transnational cooperation among them, which didn't used to be the case. And that makes them more effective and also more dangerous,
Almost
I would argue.
like mutating kind of, right?
Yeah.
So is that, when you say it's more entrenched, you're saying that these, what we thought were just flash-in-the-pan movements have now found a more effective way of like actually changing the system to have lasting impacts?
Yeah. Well, take a look at, for instance, one of the originals that has inspired a lot of other parties. It's the Le Pen's party in France, which has been around since the 70s and has always been a marginal party, but in every subsequent presidential election, they've been doing a little bit better, and they're sort of the main opposition party now.
Right.
They haven't disappeared. They've been kind of building their strength all along. So I think that's an example. Also, the other thing which is perhaps new is that mainstream conservative parties are kind of adopting themselves because they see this challenge on the right, and they're sort of becoming more mainstream conservative parties, being more anti-immigrant and getting into all these culture war issues. So they're kind of trying to steal the thunder of the far right, but they're actually becoming more like the far right themselves. Well, the best example, of course, obviously being the Republicans in the U.S.
Right. And is there something from your studies in Estonian history that you think lets you see these movements around the world through a certain lens, or something that you think is, pressing from Estonian history that's now playing out around the world?
Well, from the Estonian side, when I started studying this, the contemporary radical right, that is, there was nothing in Estonia. Estonia was one of the fortunate countries a decade ago, or 2 decades ago, that didn't have this sort of movement when most other European countries did. It's not the case now. In the last 5-6 years, then the far right has also become strong in Estonia, unfortunately. But what is new is that they're sort of, as I was saying earlier, that they're sort of very transnational, that they're aping and imitating what's being said. If Steve Bannon says something, or Tucker Carlson says something in the U.S., that same sort of media space that the alt-right has it's things that wouldn't you think, like, it's not an issue in Estonia, but they get transposed. And that applies to all these other countries. All these American culture war issues all of a sudden become issues elsewhere where they hadn't been an issue.
Well, thank you, Professor Kasekamp, and we're going to take a listen to one of your recommendations, Sata Sata by Mary Calhoun, who we were lucky enough to see perform at Mondial Montreal earlier in November.
Sata, 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 vihmad kõnesa. Ma ei pelge sinna, illoma sussa. Tule, 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 tule kõnesa. Sukkarinda pista ja subel purjeta. Tuule, tuule, laiva, laiva, hinda lehita. Tuubel hää on sõita ja ilma kullelda. Korgelt alakaia hinda hely alla mõtsu pääle hõigada. Tuule, tuule, tuule kõne saata, saata, sao kõne. Puhtas parem kõne saata, selge silmä kõne. Seni rända, kuni targem pasma saa. Kuni käe kerges ja silmä selges saa. Hinda, hinda elotähti opi lugema. Opi ilma tundma ja arvama taast saa. Tuule, tuule. näio, 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 näio suures sai. Suures targempas lugejasta sai. Tuule, tuule, tuule kõne, saata, saata, sa ohkõne. Puhu puhtas palõkõne, saata selge silmäkene. Tuule, tuule, tuule kõne, saata, saata, sa ohkõne. Puhu puhtas palõkõne, saata selge silmäkene.
Hello, hello, and welcome back to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. My name is Seth Martosh, and I'm here with my co-host, Alex Troxel.
Yep.
And today we are in the studio with Professor Kasekamp from Estonia, and kind of touching on music in terms of, from a political lens. How has, Estonian people used music to kind of protest or, voice their opinion?
Oh, well, that's an excellent question because Estonians are quite famous for choral singing. And Estonia regained its independence in 1991 as the result of something that we refer to as the Singing Revolution. There's actually a good documentary about it. It's called exactly that, The Singing Revolution, which happened in 1988 when there was a spontaneous gathering at the Song Festival grounds, and the sort of political protest songs were sung, and sort of the hardline Communist Party leadership was removed. But Estonia, but also Latvia and Lithuania, to a lesser degree, have these national song festivals every 5 years, which is kind of like an Estonian Olympics almost, in that it's the biggest event that everyone prepares for years. And so you have like 20,000 people singing together on stage.
Wow.
And at the Song Festival grounds, over 100,000 people in the audience. Mm-hmm. The Estonian whole population is just over 1 million, so it's a sizable portion
Right.
of the country is all gathered together for that one event.
Is there a certain song that is used in this sort of music, or?
Well, it's a whole day event, so
Yeah.
there's the repertoire is extensive. But there are a few sort of patriotic songs that sort of where they begin with, and some patriotic songs at the end with, and in between they have all sorts. They have kids choirs, women's choirs, men's choirs, mixed choirs, or pieces with orchestra. Some things that are more folksy, some things which are new and contemporary to add some zest, and they've also become quite international. There's like lots of people from everywhere in the world who want to participate in this.
Right.
But it's all in Estonian.
That's a really interesting part of the Estonian music scene. Is there another aspect of Estonian music that you'd like to highlight in a song?
I'm a bit stuck with that one. There, I mean, it's the choral singing. The other is sort of the pop and rock stuff. They're very big. Like several of these songs that I chose here are sort of ethno folk stuff, or tinged with it. Like even the metal song there is this sort of I don't know how we would call that genre, but it also kind of features bagpipes. Like Estonians also have bagpipes. It's not only the Scots. So lots of
Really?
European people. They're not as big as the Scottish bagpipes, but it's the same principle.
Do you think that developed independently, or do you think?
Yeah, no, it's not like the Scots are famous for it, but they're not the only ones who
Right,
have it in
yeah.
their folk music. It's just everyone knows the Scottish one.
Huh.
Yeah. Just like, for instance, saunas. That's a big Estonian thing.
Yeah.
Everyone knows Finnish saunas.
Right.
Right, but Finns and Estonians are very closely related. The language is almost mutually intelligible. They're neighbors. So sauna goes back to a long time, tens of thousands of years ago, when they were still more or less same nomadic peoples.
I was curious a little bit about the Finnish relation in terms of sometimes being considered part of the Baltics and sometimes not. What's the consensus on that, if there is one?
Well, Finns certainly don't like to be considered part of the Baltic, but and Estonians often like to consider themselves Nordic rather than Baltic. But if you look at in terms of the Baltic Sea region, then of course Finland is a Baltic country. But usually people always refer to simply Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania as the three Baltic countries. But in the region itself, people talk more and more about a wider Baltic Sea region, which encompasses the Nordic countries, the three Baltic countries, parts of Germany and Poland as well. So there's lots of sort of interaction, cooperation, commercial activity between them. And basically, they're all countries that now belong to the European Union and also NATO. So the Baltic Seas become the countries have become very close again. And that's the only exception being Russia, which is, of course, the troublemaker.
Yeah. Right. Is there a reason why Estonia is not interested with associating with the other Baltic countries? Or?
Oh, yeah. Well, basically, this came up in the 1990s. When they were all three together stuck in the Soviet Union, and when they struggled to get out of it through the Singing Revolution, then they cooperated very closely. But as soon as they regained their independence in 91, they all sort of wanted to go their own way. And part of it was to get into the European Union and NATO as quickly as possible and distance themselves from Russia. And Estonia was quicker with its reforms than Latvia and Lithuania at that time. And Estonians thought that if they kind of rebrand themselves as Nordic and they have that sort of connection to Finland, which the others don't, because Latvian and Lithuanian are Baltic languages, which are very similar to each other. Right. They're Indo-European. Latvian and Lithuanian is closer to English than it is to Estonian, linguistically. So because of the Finnish connections, Estonians were eager to be sort of Nordic, but also because being Baltic back in the 90s could be easily confused with being Balkan. And during the 90s in the Balkans, what did you have? Ethnic cleansing, civil war. Didn't want to have that image, whereas the Nordics were all about Volvo and IKEA and sort of great prosperity and lifestyle. And so that was part of the pitch of Estonia rebranding itself Nordic as to make it more acceptable to joining the European Union, not being just one of these kind of strange, exotic Eastern European countries that we know little about, but connecting. That, of course, didn't sit well with the Latvians or Lithuanians.
Right. But in the end, there's a sort of common connection between a lot of the countries in that area.
Yeah.
Right, of course.
Yeah, and in the end, all three joined the European Union at the same time, and they cooperate very closely at the moment.
Right. So we'll take a listen to the one that you mentioned with the metal song with some bagpipes in it.
Ah, sure. That's the one by Metsätöl.
Right, so we'll have a listen to that on CIUT 89.5 on Tracks from Abroad, and we'll be right back.
Üle Moinude valendavou, kohu lillede uud
Hello and welcome back to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. Hopefully you've enjoyed the smattering of rock and folk music that you've heard from Estonia today. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about the Estonian community, the Tartu residence in downtown Toronto is actually the heart of the Estonian diaspora. In the basement there's an archive, there's a banquet where Estonian events are held.
Yes, and that residence is how the endowment for the Chair of Estonian Studies was set up here at the University of Toronto, and that's why at the university we have the only professorship in Estonian Studies in North America. And Tracks from Abroad is made by a volunteer crew of students who we cannot do the show without. Our board tech, Matthew, our editors, Simon and Rosa, social media managers, Akshita and Isabella, and our directors, Elżbieta and Rosa now also, now that Jesse's taken some time away. So
Yeah. And coming up to end the show, we're going to have a listen to the Canadian-Estonian artist by the name of Kylie Killian. There we go.
nice.
Yeah, if you haven't noticed, Seth is the one who does the pronunciation of all the songs and most of the artists.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
I do my best. And after that, we'll listen to Indigenous Waves. This has been Tracks from Abroad on CIUT. Have a good night, everyone.
2, 3, 4. When we met far away in another time and place, it was as if all in an instant. Despite the distance, you were meant for me. Show me, show me, and I will give my heart for you. Come near me, be here. The world is welcome by my side and be here. Come near me, be here. The world is welcome by my side and be here. When we left, I was afraid